Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Kathy Davidson, and I'm the founding director of the Futures Initiative. And in 1 second, I'm going to turn the event and the mic over to Jessica Murray, who's a doctoral student in developmental psychology and one of our Futures Initiative fellows. One thing the Futures Initiative does, it always empowers our graduate students to take a leadership role. And Jessica led us on this event and did all of the managing, arranging, and thinking, along with the other fellows, about what we're doing today. So welcome, everyone, and here's Jessica.
Thank you, Kathy. So we had a lot of RSVPs for the event today, but it seems like people are still trickling in. So before we get started, I want to get everyone kind of warmed up and engaged in the conversation. So we're going to do something called Think, Pair, Share. And Mike is handing out cards right now. Basically, we just think about why you came today, what you hope to learn, either one of those questions. Think about that for 90 seconds and write it down on your card. And I'm going to start a timer. Okay, now that you've had about 90 seconds to think about why you're here today, talk to someone that you don't know, and for the next 90 seconds, we're going to share what you've written down. So pair up with someone that you haven't met before. Okay, I'm going to call time now. It's been 90 seconds. Is there anyone that wants to share what you talked about with your partner? Anyone want to share? I'm just going to take from anyone that feels comfortable sharing what they just talked about. Yes. Hold on just 1 second. I just want to make sure that you...
Okay. So Mike is interested in this event because he's very interested in disability studies and learning more about what he could do. And we were thinking about technology in the classroom and how he uses YouTube videos in his class, but that many of those videos don't necessarily have subtitles, for example. And so that was one thing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to share what you talked about? Yes, let me hand this to you.
This young lady and myself discussed why we're here, and she's a graduate student, and she knows the speaker today, and was one of the speakers, and was happy to see her and to be able to hear how she is and what she's been doing. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm a guest, and to learn, generally speaking, what's being done in the world of the disabled to help them live a more fulfilling life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for your participation. We're going to come back to this discussion at the end of the session. As you can probably see, we only have one speaker here today. Our other speaker, Sara, is joining us remotely because of an illness. But I think that that is a good reminder that we're all vulnerable. We all share the need for support and accommodations from time to time, and that's kind of part of what this event is about, so I think it's a good reminder. I'm also really happy that the snowstorm that's coming waited until after our event today because... It's like a spring day out there. Yeah. And so because of this change, we're also going to be slightly changing the order of the presentation. So if you have a printed agenda, it's going to be a little bit different. Just to note that we're going to watch a short video clip first, followed by Sara's presentation, and then April will speak, and we'll do another Think, Pair, Share, and have questions at the end. So with that, I'm going to introduce our two speakers. Sara Hendren, who's joining us remotely, is an artist, design researcher, and assistant professor at Olin College, and her work is focused on adaptive and assistive technologies, prosthetics, inclusive design, and accessible architecture. And April Coughlin has been a Wheeler since the age of 6 and is a passionate advocate for accessibility. She is currently training teachers as an assistant professor of adolescent special education in the Department of Teaching and Learning at SUNY New Paltz. So both of their full bios are available in the shared Google document and on our event page as well. So thank you both for being here today and sharing your expertise with us about accessibility, mobility, and design. So we're going to start with a brief excerpt from the 2008 film by Astra Taylor called The Examined Life. And this is a clip from a segment with the philosopher and gender theorist Judith Butler and artist and disability rights activist Sara Taylor, who uses a powered wheelchair. And in this clip, they're going to be walking around San Francisco while they talk about walking, disability, and interdependence.
I'm just thinking that nobody takes a walk without there being a technique of walking. Yeah. Nobody goes for a walk without there being something that supports that walk outside of ourselves.
Okay, now we're going to switch over to Sarah's presentation. Are you there, Sarah?
Yeah.
Okay, it's all yours.
Hi, Sarah.
Hello, everyone. So here we are. Thank you for the various digital accommodations, and I'm glad we're on Twitter and so on to talk to each other. It's great to be here. I do work at this college you're seeing the screenshot of, Olin College, which is outside of Boston, 12 years old. No departments, no tenure, kind of brand new way of thinking about engineering education. And we can talk about that later if you like. But I teach there a class that's called Investigating Normal, Adaptive and Assistive Technologies. And it's disability studies in a design build studio for engineers. And I want to just submit to you today that I think we live in a time when it's really exciting to think about access and disability, precisely because it's very unclear what it is that constitutes human ability and what it is that we are meant to design and engineer, at which scale and which part of the world. How do we think about building an inclusive world? Let me just suggest some ways that that's true. Probably many of you are familiar with images like this, a woman jogging on super high-tech legs. This is the best kind of replacement limbs that money can buy, and they're being touted in this kind of superhuman and cyborg story of the future about prosthetics, or things like this, top-of-the-line myoelectric arm, where you get a replacement part that looks like the old hand, but just now in kind of carbon fiber and circuitry. All of these are really exciting bits of engineering, but they tend to be the only story that we tell about disability and technology, when in fact the story is more interesting. So like this image of a little boy wearing a cochlear implant, probably plenty of you are familiar with cochlear implants. A lot of engineering work has gone to making and refining cochlear implants. People who are deaf, and that's interesting. It's an interesting contrast, though, to think about this image, which is of Gallaudet University down near Washington, and a building there that's designed under a whole design program and set of principles called deaf space, about 100 points to deaf space, and how we would design around deafness. If you see in this image, there's a long image of a hallway, and there are pods for meetings and classrooms, but they don't have walls floor to ceiling because ASL is a visual language. You don't need to cut off the sound. Or the way that in the same kind of building, there are faceted corners instead of hard edges for corners so that you can see people coming around the hallway next to yours. So it's interesting to think about cochlear implants as one way of looking at deafness, which is toward granting the hearing back in the engineering. But this is engineering and design at architectural scale that actually accommodates difference. And so that's a really interesting and working path, I think, for us to think about where and when and how do we know what to build. The same is true of autism. I'm showing you an image of social robots in a classroom for school-aged children. And there's been a lot of work around using social robots for children on the autism spectrum to do things like facial recognition and body language and affect and so on. Also really interesting. But if you look at an IT firm which was started in Denmark, I'm showing you the screenshot of their homepage now, called Specialisterne. Specialisterne is an IT firm that's staffed entirely with consultants on the autism spectrum, because the cognitive profile in autism is often exceptionally well suited to IT work. So this was not so much a kind of service for those consultants, so much as a good business bet that this cognitive profile would be incredibly gifted. So here again, there's a difference between designing in a therapeutic kind of logic and designing for accommodation. And I think these are just two examples that I think are kind of key and watershed moments for us to rethink all of the scales at design, for design. So things like products, yes, but also things like architecture, things like systems, and even economies and ecologies that accommodate difference. So I'm interested in an engineering and design work that does some solving problems in the traditional sense, but also work that asks questions. And I'll tell you a little bit about investigating normal in my classroom. Just really quickly, I'll tell you that I worked with my students with a man named Chris Hinojosa. I'm showing you an image of him here. He was born without his right arm, so he has one left arm and a shoulder and residual limb on his right side. And Chris has never been made use of traditional prosthetics. There were plenty that were built for him as a child, but because he was born this way, his body, as all bodies, is radically adaptive and plastic and can do all kinds of stuff with his toes and his left arm, and using his right residual limb as a kind of bracing mechanism. He's just learned how to use this body. And so it's a really interesting pause and question in my classroom about where are the prosthetics, what's the role for the engineer here? Chris was interested not in a universal arm like that fancy one I showed you, but like in this situation where he's at a rock climbing wall. That rock climbing is something that Chris does find difficult. So my students worked with him. I'm just showing you some renderings of the modular attachment that they built to make a kind of snap-on, snap-off arm attachment so that he could do the one thing that he couldn't do very well, one of a few things that he can't do very well, but not for an arm that's meant to do everything for him again. So this is an attachment that's on the rock climbing wall for Chris, or the way he's used that modular socket even more often is to load the arm in a physical therapy way so that you can strengthen the muscles that atrophy on that shoulder. So there's a long extension here with him on a yoga mat on all fours. So that's asking a different question about what prosthetics can do. Not can we build for $90,000 a universal arm to sort of mimic the hand in its typical capacities, but what can we ask differently about what tasks people want to do and what are the tools that they need to do those things? And can we do it more affordably? Can we do it in a more nimble kind of way? The same is true with this project, a collaboration with a woman named April Coughlin, who's a little person with a form of dwarfism, who came to me to ask for a podium for her to give lectures at. She frequently lectures and gives talks in galleries and so on. She's an art historian. And she had a small podium built at her scale out of wood that I'm showing you here, but what she really wanted was a portable podium, and I'm showing you some of the design that we went through to create a portable collapsible podium that was lightweight and sturdy. We ended up building it out of carbon fiber that she could take on an airplane with her, that would pack flat, that would be strong but lightweight, and again at her scale. And so here's Amanda performing at that podium. You can see next to her a typically scaled podium. After this, we actually handed off our design for a 2.0 version. I'm showing you this designer named Hugo Pilot, who just raised his hand and reached out to me and said, "Can I help you on any projects? I'm interested in this work." And I said, "I think Amanda needs a 2.0. So you're seeing here the CAD of a new design that he made, and Amanda using it in her classroom. And here's a beauty shot of that 2.0 podium. You can see how he's with cutouts in that metal, taken out even more of the weight and made those hinges even stronger. We've had a lot of interest in this object. So for me, this podium of Amanda's is not simply a one-off kind of boutique prosthesis. This actually, I think, is an indicator of where we stand in terms of the manufacturing right now. That is a radically distributed mass customization. I think we're seeing this in makerspaces and in digital material fabrication. I think we're seeing these models in lots of places. And I think it's high time and overdue to be looking for designs in the world at all scales that can be tuned and tailored more for difference, instead of thinking of manufacturing and production only at 10,000 widgets at a time, right, in that kind of industrialized inheritance. And then I'll just finally show you an ongoing project of mine, which is about the inclined plane or ramp. This is a montage of some ramps that I designed. They're 3-foot square wooden ramps with a piano hinge at one end, and they have leveling feet to go up and down a little bit. You can see they nest and they stack, and they're a kind of kit of parts that are kind of small bits of furniture in the built environment. They're on casters, so they can be portable. They are a simple machine in Galileo's configuration of the lever and the pulley and the screw. They are doing a machinic work almost imperceptibly all the time. Showing you here again just features of those ramps that stack and move around at will. These ramps are designed for two city users that are never thought of, I would argue, in the same breath, and that is skateboarders, as you see on the left, and wheelchair users, as you see on the right. The inclined plane is used for altering force across the surface for play, for access, for a multiple kind of politics of physics that's happening in cities by people using two kinds of wheeled gear. One we tell a story about that's athletic and virtuosic, and one we tell a story that's much more medicalized. And I like to blur those lines with this ramp, partly because it is meant to solve problems and it is meant to ask questions. So you see on the right, that chair user is at what's called a single-step entrance in Boston, or in Cambridge, where I live. The single-step entrance is a gray area in the Americans with Disabilities Act architectural code, whereby a small mom-and-pop shop can be grandfathered in and not overhaul their entrance, keep a single-step entrance if they're not doing major renovations. As a result, in cities like Boston and New York and Toronto, cities of this age, you will see this typology everywhere. There's an overhead map of Cambridge Street in Cambridge where I live, and that's all the incidents, all those dots, probably 2 dozen there, indicate the places where that single-step entrance is lie in just a short stretch of street. So I started to think about the kind of weird Venn diagram. What happens if you ask new questions and try to tell new stories? Which kind of gear for what? And what would a flexible built environment look like? What are the new stories we would tell with different city users? I want to also just say that this project is partly material design, but it also is meant to launch and I've spent my time launching events from that material design. So I'm showing you like a skater and a wheelchair dancer at an event in Toronto, taking stock of the built environment. We took photos live and remapped a whole quadrant of Toronto according to its inclined planes. And I also invited somebody from Parks and Rec in Toronto, and the skateboarder and a chair user and an architectural theorist to talk about these things together. That is, what might they have in common they hadn't seen before? For an hour, could they provisionally see the overlaps in their work? And this work has gone on to become a partnership with Alice Shepard, who's a wheelchair dancer. Alice came to campus and gave an artist talk and did some dancing for us. She was interested in a ramp for dancing and asked us, my students and me, if we could make such a design for her. So we prototyped, you can see here my small ramps in the foreground. We prototyped some kind of dance ramped environments for her. And students eventually came up with, I'm showing you the laser cut paper, and the first year students, 18-year-olds, who fabricated a giant ramped landscape, 24-foot square ramped landscape for dancing. They built it on our campus. They insisted they didn't want to just give her the CAD, they wanted to actually build the thing. So I'm showing you a bunch of shots of that. And then Alice and her dance partner came to campus and performed on that. And then they handed it over to a professional shop to build this ramp, and I'll just show you. So that's a video of Alice and Laurel dancing on that stage ramp that's now been installed in a couple of places, and they've had a couple of performances. So we're really proud of that work. I'm at time, so I won't show you the further event that we did in Seoul, Korea, but I can tell you afterwards. Let me just end by saying I'm interested in talking with you all about solving problems and asking questions. We've tried to do with design at various scales, modes of asking questions, different kinds of questions about atypical bodies and minds, and figuring out what we learn when we pay attention to those things. And that's how to reach me. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Sarah. That was really excellent. Now we're going to switch over to April Coughlin. This one? Okay.
So, thank you, Sarah. Sarah, I can't wait to meet you. Can she hear me or no?
Yeah, I can hear you. Likewise.
I love that you really, there's a lot of innovative thinking going on. And I think one of the key points is that you absolutely include people with disabilities in these innovations and in the thinking, in the discussion. And I think that's the most important point.
Yeah, I mean, there's no substitute for what people want, not just what we think, right?
That's right, that's right. And I'm going to talk about a few things here from my own experience where I don't understand why society still isn't, for the most part, asking people with disabilities for their input. Because really, a lot of accessibility problems would be solved if our opinions were, considered. Okay, so I'm just going to introduce myself a little bit, although Jessica did a fantastic job. I love this photo. So my name is April Coughlin, and I am assistant professor at SUNY New Paltz. And I love this picture because it's me in front of a sign on a bus that says, "Separate is never equal." And I think that's sort of a running theme throughout my life. But I never really considered it until I got to college and found a lot of physical barriers and attitudinal barriers in college. Okay, if this is gonna work. So on the left side is a picture of me trying to hail a cab in New York City. I won't even get into the situations of why or why not that cab did not stop for me, but it really speaks to, and if this was a longer class, it would speak to the attitudes about disability and what we think we know about disability. One of the things that my students always say to me is, maybe the cab driver thought that you needed an accessible cab, which is a really valid point, right? But unfortunately in New York City, only a very, very small percentage of cabs are accessible. Okay, this is me in front of a broken elevator, which I won't even get into that because that's just the daily in New York City. Thank goodness today on the subway there were no broken elevators. Going home, who knows? So I've been a wheeler for 31 years. I do identify in many situations as disability first. That is my preference. I'm a proud wheeler. And naturally, being injured for 31 years, spinal cord injured, you become a lifelong disability advocate because you can't help but not. Oh, that's a very good picture. Yeah, very good question. I couldn't say, but I was not in a good mood when I held that finger up. So I was going to say this morning, because I was going to go to Penn Station, but it actually happened the other morning at Penn Station. This is just sort of a date on the daily. Things like this happen. So, and this was pretty detrimental to my morning. Okay, so the other morning, I went to get on Amtrak. And before I got on Amtrak, I stopped at Magnolia Bakery right in Penn Station to get my cup of coffee and a muffin, right? Well, all of a sudden I got up to where the self-serve coffee area is. I don't think we have coffee here, but imagine those, but much higher, right? The really big machines. Okay, so I go up to it, and I've done this many, many times before, and I never questioned it. I just assumed that both of them were regular coffee. I like high test, right? Regular coffee, and that if you wanted to get a decaf coffee, you would have to, they would give it to you from behind the counter, right? That's how they sort of separate it. Because I didn't see any signs that said decaf. So I just assumed it was high test. So all of a sudden I asked them, I said, well, are these both caffeinated? And she said, oh no, that one on the left is decaf. The horror that went through me, thinking, how many times have I gotten a cup of coffee here and probably got decaf and then wondered why I had a headache later in the day? All because, right, it was not, quote, universally designed, right? Nobody thought to put the sign a little lower because somebody who's, might want coffee who's less than 5 feet tall, right? So just considerations, right? But how do we develop those considerations? I'm going to get into that. And our thinking about disability. Thank you, Jessica. Okay, so I also mentor individuals with spinal cord injuries to empower them. This is my friend Mickey on the left side. We're at the Disability Pride Parade. Linda came to the Disability Pride Parade. It's in New York City every year, so make sure you come this year if you haven't. And my friend Amelia, who's also a wheeler on the right. we're holding up some flags that say, wow, women on wheels. Okay, so growing up though, and for this presentation I was thinking, I really didn't know which direction to go in, but I thought that I would sort of present it in the way that I present to my students in the first class or the second class when I introduce myself. Because really, when I introduce myself, it makes you understand why I went into the profession that I did, teaching college ultimately, because I want to educate future generations, right? So I want to educate the educators who are going in and teaching our students, because that's really the way we're going to change thinking about disability, in my opinion. Okay, go ahead, Jessica. Thank you. So when I grew up in New Paltz, actually, I learned, and I fully participated and I learned with non-disabled peers. I was in sports, band, choir, field trips. I didn't know what inclusion was because it was just being part of going to school with everybody else, right? Sorry, my back is to you. Okay, I experienced opportunities for social development. Non-disabled peers learned about disability as diversity and advocated for disability rights, which we call ally behavior. And a lot of times we don't think about the benefits of non-disabled people, right, in the classroom with disabled people. We're just thinking about the benefits of people with disabilities being included. Sorry, yeah, I don't know what the last one was, I forgot. Oh, so ultimately, growing up in an inclusive environment, I developed my own self-advocacy skills. Go ahead. Okay, so I went off to college, and this is where it gets really fun, because I grew up in sort of this little microcosm of the world. It was great, New Paltz, liberal hippie town, everything's accessible. Not everything, Main Street is not accessible in New Paltz. I had to be carried up 3 steps to get a tattoo. I got my bachelor's at SUNY Albany. I lived on campus, and I faced many disability-related access issues, and I quickly learned to advocate for myself. Go ahead. Okay, so it all started with a waffle maker, and that's a picture of a waffle maker with a waffle already made, which I would not be able to make because in my freshman year on campus in the cafeteria, no one thought to put the waffle maker on a lower counter. So the counter was probably higher than that counter. But imagine, now I can reach that counter, but I can't make my own waffle. And I know this sounds petty, but it's not. Because when you're a freshman in college, you have a right to eat as many waffles as you want and to eat as much ice cream as you want, because disabled people should, be afforded the same opportunity to gain the freshman 15 as well, right? We shouldn't be left out. All right, so imagine the waffle maker is up on that, but the problem is when you make a waffle, you have to open it up, right? Then you gotta but I can't close it now, so now I have to ask for help. Now, there's certain situations in life where, because yes, I believe absolutely in interdependence, right? Everyone is interdependent, but I wanna make my own waffle as a freshman. And there's no reason I shouldn't be able to. It should just be on a lower counter. Can you believe I had to write a letter to the president of the college to get the waffle maker lowered? That's ridiculous. Okay, next slide. So the problem is this continued waffle maker drama in my life. Go to a Hampton Inn, go to any hotel, still on a high counter, right? So it has followed me through life. Okay. Social barriers. So on campus, real quick, I'll just give this, and keep me on time, okay? So this is the way SUNY Albany was set up. You had the classes in the middle, you had dorm number 1, which is where all the freshman housing was, dorm number 2, dorm number 3, sort of around campus. Then dorm number 4 is where I lived. You can go ahead. Yep, there's me hanging out, living in dorm number 4. But if I wanted to hang out with my freshman friends from where the accessible housing was, I know it's corny, but you have no idea how long that took me to figure out. I would have to push all the way around campus just because that was the only accessible housing. Nobody thought, oh, let's make accessible housing in all of the dorms, right? Okay. Another constant issue is bathroom accessibility. I need a little audience participation here. So by a show of hands, or in whatever way you would like to express yourself, if you had to go to the bathroom, how many of you would choose to A, use the bathroom on the floor that you're on? Come on, you better all raise your hands because that's just, come on, right? All right, or B, use the bathroom that requires you to travel from one end of the building to the other to get to the elevator, then to take the elevator 6 levels down, and then go across the entire building to get to it. It's cleaner. Right, if it's cleaner. It's not cleaner. That's where the accessible bathroom is, and I can say it because I graduated with I finished graduations in May, but I finished my PhD at Syracuse, and now I can say that was at Syracuse University. And the same went for the School of Ed. When I was in the School of Ed at Syracuse University, if I was teaching in the School of Ed, or if I was taking classes, I would have to push all the way down the hallway, take the elevator down to the first floor, then push all the way down the rest of the hallway, out to the front door, onto the main street, across the street, over to Starbucks, where the accessible bathroom was. How many of you have to go through that? Right. Okay. So after my master's in secondary ed, 5 minutes or so? Okay. I taught in New York City public schools, which is a whole other story, and we can talk about it while we have time after the presentations. But I taught a total of 6 years before I went off to get a little more education. I learned a lot about parents, a lot about students, and a lot about physical inaccessibility in the schools. Okay. Basically, I experienced a lack of access and inclusion for students and teachers with disabilities. We don't think about teachers when we're thinking about inclusion, right? Or administrators. Broken elevators, inaccessible bathrooms, separate classrooms and entrances, negative attitudes about disability, lack of accessibility overall across most schools. And so in 2010, I discovered the field of disability studies through CUNY School of Professional Studies. I highly recommend the master's program there. And I pursued a master's there. And then I went on to further to earn a PhD at Syracuse to basically scratch that, to kind of just change the world, right, in terms of accessibility and disability. But first, a little bit more about New York City, teaching in New York City schools, because this is how we educate students, right, about disability through the lived experience. So I would go in, you can go to the next pictures, on the first day of school, and I would say to my students, so on the left side is a photo of my students outside with a fire truck in the background during a fire drill. And on the right side is a picture of students lifting me up in my chair. So on the first day of school, I would say to my students, okay, we're on the 3rd floor. That's where I teach, on the 3rd, because that's where the job was, right? And I would say to them, we'll learn names later, but I'm Miss Coughlin. I'm obviously in a wheelchair. I obviously don't want to be stuck up here in a fire when you all go down the stairs and go to safety. So this is how we're going to learn how we lift Miss Coughlin, right? So there we go. Sometimes I do demonstrations if we have time, but we're not doing that today. Okay, field trips. We would go on a lot of field trips because in New York City, why not, right? So these are some of my students in the subway station with my students. And basically, when you go on a field trip with a teacher with a disability or a student with a disability, you A, stick together, and B, you learn a lot about inaccessibility in New York City, right? We got a lot of good things going on here, but we also got a lot of work to do. All right, so in this situation, we were in a store and we actually couldn't find the elevator, so we just took the escalator. And on the right side, that's a student carrying me down the stairs because we walked about 1.25 miles, and I say pushed. We pushed about 1.25 miles to the closest accessible subway station up in Washington Heights. That was 1.25 miles, or 1.75 miles, 1.75 miles, I think, yeah. Okay. And the elevator was broken. Oh, and yeah, the elevator was broken. Yeah, thanks, New York City. Accessibility status update. Okay, so I began to notice as a teacher with a disability, again, I taught English. I didn't teach disability studies. I didn't even know what disability studies was at the time. I was just living this, right, every day. So I noticed that my students, and you can zoom to the next one, started to consider disability as a form of diversity in their projects, which I thought was really powerful, right? And this is, again, before I even thought of disability studies. Okay. So the elevator in my school, there were 2 elevators. One of them was broken almost 50% of the time. And my classroom was on the 3rd floor. And there's a lovely picture of the elevator with caution tape in front of it. I find that amusing. I'm not sure about the caution tape, but funny. So my students decided that they were sick of me not being able to get up to the 3rd floor, or them having to carry me, or having to have English on the baseball field. I mean, really? Or in the basement. So they created a petition, they got 300 signatures, we presented it to the administration, and magically, the elevator was fixed immediately, right? Yeah, except ultimately, within 2 weeks, it was broken again. But my students were learning about how to advocate for the rights of people with disabilities. Okay. So every semester I tell my college students, I start out by saying, I strongly believe that if we are going to truly embrace the concept of inclusion, inclusive education, and take this, I call it a journey. We take a journey together every semester. Maybe it's kind of corny, but whatever. Then it's important to understand why I, as your instructor, believe in the rights of people with disabilities and why it's become my life's work. So let's just get back to that broken elevator for a minute. So as I was waiting several times teaching high school, I would sit at that broken elevator and I would wonder, why is it not getting fixed, A, and B, here I am, I'm able to sort of rally my students to get it fixed, even if it's temporary, but what about the students who required the use of that elevator, right? The students who used walkers or wheelchairs or, weren't able to get up the stairs otherwise. Where's their voice in all of this? And so after teaching in New York City public schools for 6 years, I went on to do a master's, PhD, and basically learned about disability studies, which gave me the language to explain what I had been going through. I just want to skip through real quick and just give you some stats on New York City schools, which I think are really important. You already went over the models in the video, actually, so, okay. So my research for my dissertation actually focused on students with physical disabilities in New York City schools and their self-reported lived experiences. I know I'm almost out of time, so I'm going to just show you real quick. So there's 435 New York City public high schools in all 5 boroughs, right? Okay. 30% of them are just flat out not accessible. Like teachers, students, administrators, can't get into them if they require the use of a ramp or an elevator. Now, 70% are labeled functionally accessible. That means you can get in and around the building, okay? However, 87% of that 70% are housed in partially accessible buildings. So that means we're saying that those buildings are accessible, but only parts of those buildings are accessible. So students may not be able to access, labs or, maybe one of the gyms or certain classrooms or stuff like that. So that means that only 13% of that 70% are in fully accessible buildings, and that's only 9% out of the 435 high schools. That is a civil rights issue. Okay, so my argument is, what if schools said that non-disabled students could flat out not attend 30% of schools for some arbitrary reason, as arbitrary as no accessible entrance? This is no different, yet somehow it goes unnoticed or unaddressed. So I bring all of this to my students because I want them to understand that on top of people with disabilities being part of the conversation and the discussion, and being included and being these innovative thinkers about making things accessible, we need to first think about this awareness that things need to be accessible, right? That people with disabilities have a human right to be included, right? Included in buildings, included in activities, included in employment, right? All of that. So we can talk more during the Q&A, but I'm very passionate.
Thank you so much, April. That was very informative, and I think it's really great to hear your perspective as a lifelong advocate and person who is personally affected by these issues every single day. It's really great to hear your voice. So now we're going to do another really quick think, pair, share. So if anyone wasn't here, we'll give you a card. But for people that were here, think about the question that you wrote down or the reason why you were here, and then just take another 90 seconds to write down if you learned what you came to learn, or if you have a new question now that the discussion is over. And I'll start the timer, so 90 seconds. Okay, now we're gonna take 90 more seconds, so to pair up and share what you wrote down. Preferably talk to somebody that you don't know sitting next to you, and I'll restart the timer for 90 seconds. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and call on other people. Does anyone want to share what you just discussed, or have a question that you want to share? Yes? Hold on just one second.
We were just discussing, we both have, you live not far from New Paltz, and I have family in New Paltz, and it really hits me now so much more about how inaccessible Main Street is. It's incredibly steep, and just, I think that hearing you speak has really opened my eyes to some of those issues, and I really appreciate it. Yeah.
I'm just going to add to that, actually, because I've definitely talked to a lot of the store owners in New Paltz and other small towns or anywhere, even in the city. And a lot of them will say, oh, well, but the law doesn't require us to make it accessible. So like, say, if you roll or walk down Main Street in New Paltz, just like any small town, or any place in New York City, pretty much, West Village, you'll notice that most stores have a step or a couple of steps in. And really, it's a choice we're making, I think. Do we want to include people with disabilities by creating ramps, by creating a way to get in, or don't we? We can hide behind the law that we don't have to do it, or we can choose to include people.
Okay, anyone else want to share a thought or a question? Allison.
Oh, and on that note, while you're bringing the mic over, there's a new restaurant going in New Paltz. It's like a 2-story restaurant. I already went to the building planner, I don't know the title, and he told me that they do not, by law, have to make the second floor accessible. So therefore, if I want to, and I'm not going in there, but if I wanted to go in there, I'd only be able to eat on the first floor. That's a restaurant being built in 2017. We should be angry.
April, I just have something that I'd like to add or ask if there's any research about this. You know, I think about the accessibility issue for differently abled people, and I think it's colonial. So I wanted to know, has there been anybody who's done research to make this historical link as to how we partition and sequester people out of certain spaces and places? I think about that because I'm a geographer, and I think about how we create and limit space for certain folks.
Yeah, I mean, yes, there definitely has been research on that. I don't know exactly names, but absolutely, yes, there has.
And Sarah may be able to chime in too on the Twitter chat or offline.
The reading that she linked to might be useful on that.
Okay, yeah. Okay, and I have one more question back here.
It's more of a comment. I feel that the term disability is it's kind of like in reverse. We are the disabled ones, and you guys are ahead of us in terms of solving problems, also perseverance, tenacity. You are ahead of us, so we are the disabled ones. So maybe we should reverse the terminology. We are disabled about disability. So we are disabled too, so I think that's something I get for, and I really welcome you and all of you, all your struggle to make us more aware about our humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, I think that's a great comment. Okay, I think we have time for one more, and then Katina's going to make some announcements.
I just wanted to respond to that. I mean, there's a term for it, and it's called ableism, and that's the term of people that aren't disabled. So something I've been thinking a lot about is disabled centers and how to use disability as a framework for how we kind of project onto space and onto infrastructure and onto, I guess, social modes. So, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of troubling. We're not tokens as disabled people. We're not here to inspire people, and we're not here to be pitied. And I feel like that kind of a comment, it speaks to that. Maybe I just wanted to make that statement. Thanks.
Thank you. Let me see, check the time. I think we have, can we do one more? Okay, we have one more, and then we'll go to comments from Katina.
All right, hi, my name is Mariella. Okay. And I have a hearing disability, and I graduated from NYU for my undergrad, and then I went to Georgetown. The things that I've seen is that in both of these universities, I had a significant support system. They had incredibly large disability budgets. So I was able to get the accommodations I need, such as captioning, so that I can read the conversation that is happening. However, one of the things that I've seen is that once I leave that bubble of academia and then I go out into the workplace, it just becomes such a struggle to get the accommodations I need, get the support I need, get money for budget so that I can attend a lecture or a conference or those kind of things. So my question is, what resources do you know that can help people with disabilities leaving the educational setting, leaving that bubble and joining the workplace?
So I think that's something that we could probably post different resource links. I know they're doing a Twitter feed and all that. I don't know about Twitter. I don't do Twitter. But I just want to speak to the self-advocacy point of what you're saying as well. And that's one thing that I, as a teacher educator, that's one thing that I really try to focus on, that whether you are a general educator or a special educator or any of these labels, right? It is your job to instill and provide education around building self-advocacy skills for students with disabilities. So when they go out into the workforce or they go out into higher ed or whatever it is they do after high school, you know, unfortunately, I can't say like the battle for accommodations is going to end. It's not, you know, not in my lifetime, that's for sure. But developing those self-advocacy skills, and then also non-disabled allies getting in on it. I always tell my students, you know, you can be a non-disabled ally, absolutely. We need all the help we can get in this movement. So I can speak to that. In terms of resources, I think that's something we could probably post online, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, April, and thank you, Sarah, if you're still watching us on the live stream. This has been really thought-provoking for me, and I hope the conversation will continue in just a few minutes over coffee. I just wanted to say a couple of words while we have all of your attention. My name is Katina Rogers. I'm the Deputy Director of the Futures Initiative. There are a few events coming up that we thought that you might be interested in. One is 2 weeks from tomorrow on Thursday, February 23rd at 4 p.m., sponsored by the Center for the Humanities. It's called In Theory and Practice, Accessible Cultural Education. There are flyers on the table near the door if you want to find out more. Second, a few announcements from our program. So we just launched today in collaboration with Haystack, which we're a network member of. We just published a collaborative student-written book called Structuring Equality, a handbook for student-centered learning and teaching practices. Especially anyone here who might be either a teacher or a student, but really anybody who's involved in teaching and learning in any informal way as well. I think you'll really want to check this out. It's available for free at haystack.org, hastac.org. And a print version will be available soon. This was entirely written by graduate students, edited jointly by graduate students and undergraduate students who were learning as part of our peer mentoring and leadership program. So we're really proud of this achievement that they've all completed. Second, our next event in the University Worth Fighting For series is called Global Perspectives on the Fight for Education. We think that this is going to be a really important and timely event given not only the political climate here right now, but also a window into what's happening in the fight for higher ed in many other spaces globally. Our fellow Allison Guess is going to be leading that, and it's going to be on March 6th from 2 to 3 p.m. here in the Skylight Room. Also, the Futures Initiative has just released a statement reaffirming our core values of intellectual freedom and education as a public good, again, in light of the current political situation, as well as the ongoing struggle for equality in higher education and in other spaces. It's available on our website, and we hope that you'll take a few minutes to take a look at that and consider sharing it. And in keeping with what that statement calls for and what we want to support. Next Thursday on February 16th, our colleagues at the Teaching and Learning Center and the Futures Initiative will be co-hosting a brown bag for anyone in the CUNY community who is teaching and who wants to reflect on experiences of teaching during these first couple of weeks of the administration. So you can find out more about that on our website or on the TLC website as well. Thank you, Jessica, for moderating. I'll turn it back over to you so people know what to expect in the next hour.
Thank you all for participating in the conversation. I hope you'll stick around and we can continue Q&A with April. I'm not sure if Sarah's still on. Yeah, thank you both for being here. We'll also show, if people are interested, around 3:40 p.m. we'll show a longer segment of the video that we showed earlier from Examined Life. Yeah, so that'll happen at 3:40 if people are still here and interested. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.